and lessons for K-5 students. Later, she became involved with K-5 summer school opportunities for a public school district in a rural area. These experiences created a foundation for her BSc in elementary education from the University of Kansas, followed by an MSc focused on curriculum and instruction with an emphasis on teaching English as a second language. It was during her graduate program, she launched her research centering student identity as an impact on teacher expectations using urban and suburban public school districts. She completed her doctorate in leading and learning in organizational change from Vanderbilt University Peabody College. Dr. Moore has served as an elementary classroom teacher, special education interventionist, a title reading and math specialist, and an English language learner interventionist for K-6, before moving into district leadership roles as an equity facilitator, consultant, and founding Fortified Educational Practices. At the same time, Dr. Moore also serves as a youth and family education coordinator for Unity, where she designs, teaches, and shapes young minds from birth to fifth grade through anti-racist spirituality. With that, I give you Dr. Danica Moore.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the great introduction. I am beyond flattered and moved to be here with you all today. And so I'm going to jump right into the first piece of this session today. So this keynote I've titled The Mindful Molding of a Child, the Critical Capacity of an Adult, to center on the work that exists in the field of early childhood, the home visiting space, and the critical pieces that have to be looked at to gain intentionality in the work that we do and the message that we push and the young minds that we shape. So I want to get started today by first offering a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a practice that I have learned along the way and uphold and honor that acknowledges one very important thing for me that I center in my mind. In the work that I do every single day, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, I'm spending my life commitment to educate on the task of intersectional racial equity within every single realm of identity, including gender, agender, sexuality, asexuality, religion, language, ability, all of those pieces. And so for me, it is important that I honor and acknowledge that I am educating intersectional race equity work on land that was taken from its original inhabitants. And so this traditional area that I call home here in Lawrence, Kansas, at one time was in the possession of many, many tribes that were deemed to have statehood here. And as Kansas gained statehood, including the Pawnee, the Colony, Osage, these groups were then moved on to Oklahoma and elsewhere and removed from their homelands. On top of that, I also acknowledge that the land that was taken, people were then taken to come and build upon this land as well. And I offer a labor acknowledgement to those people who came before me, some of whom are my very own ancestors, to build upon land that was stolen. So I thank all of these people who came before me that paved a way for me to be able to do what I do today, that give me the strength and the encouragement and the affirmation I need every single time that I need to get through a tough day, a difficult day, and have commitment to the work that I do. So I always give a learning dedication. So here you get to see some of the youngest minds. None of them are that little anymore, hard to believe, but I dedicate my keynote today to these children who have been in my heart since day one. I hope that these young minds forever are considered, empowered, affirmed, and loved every space that they go, every person they meet. And so I'm hoping to say that my message to you all, we will center these four beautiful faces in all of their beauty and their joy, that we work as adults to make sure that that joy is never taken from them in the work that we do and the people that we interact with that may in some point interact with them. So I want to start today by telling a story. So I know that they gave some accolades in terms of what I do, who I am, which is what you got from the right side there. But on the left side, you get a little more deeper about who I am. So I want to open up today by telling a story. I like for you to imagine me, Dr. Moore, 5 years old, with two pigtails that are twisted, and those really hard balls that connect with the elastic tied on each end, in all different rainbow colors, waiting at the bus stop at the age of 5 for the bus to pick me up, take me to kindergarten with my older sister. I still remember the day. I was wearing a dress. The top half was white, the bottom was red. The bread portion had bubbles all over it. The top part had the same bubbles and they spelled out the word fizz in bubbles. I had white socks on, folded halfway down with a frilly lace edge, and black and white saddle shoes. Dressed identical to my older sister was the typical practice of every single day for my mother, which made it hard for people to believe we were not twins. And it's several years age gap between us. This particular day, waiting for the bus, I'm looking for the only peer that I know that's a familiar face to me from school, Larry, because all of the kids at the bus stop are older. And while I'm looking out from the little manger, as I call it, because it was a very unstable structure to probably have kids waiting for a bus in, from behind me, I hear a student say, "Shut up, that's not right because you're dumb, black, and ugly." And I remember thinking, maybe that child's talking to an ant because I talk to things all the time. Ladybugs, little critters and beetles as they pass by, birds and squirrels. So maybe the student behind me is talking to a little black ant that he's seeing on the ground. But when I turned, I didn't have to ask very many questions to know who it was directed at. As I see my sister's bubble fizz dress in a bowling ball as she's tumbling with this kid on the ground, pummeling him in the face. And as this moment occurs, the bus pulls up. And the bus driver hops off the bus and grabs my sister. My mother, who waits at the top of the hill every morning until the bus has picked us up to watch, comes running down the hill and takes my sister and says, I know, I'll get them to school myself." Age 5, what I did know for sure was I knew the colors in the Crayola box. And I knew there was a black crayon and I knew there was a brown crayon. I grew up in a predominantly Black historic neighborhood, surrounded by great aunts, great grandparents, grandparents on both sides, and cousins galore that were sent from city to countryside every single summer to run around like we had no sense. It was the best of times ever, and then going back home sometimes seemed like the worst of times. But in my entire childhood, it never had to be pointed out my racial identity because I just knew who I was. I knew my family looked like me. I knew everywhere I went, church, to great aunts' houses, to cousins, everybody looked like me. But this specific day, I could not figure out exactly why I was so troubled by this young boy calling my sister dumb, black, and ugly. And when I think about the molding of a child and the critical capacity of an adult to help with that process, I think about that story. I'm going to tell you some more about that story later on here. But I asked myself in my adult years, where would a kid even get that from? I honestly could not think of spaces where I was consciously aware of how my racial identity was shaping me as a 5-year-old, as a preschooler who only went to preschool for one day, as a kid running around with my grandparents. I don't remember that ever having to come up, but I do remember being affirmed every day, being told I could do anything I wanted to do. My grandmother wrote for the newspaper. She owned her own bakery and she had a community garden. She made everything from scratch. I was a baby who never ate baby food. The closest I got was milk with some rice in the bottle. Everything was homemade from scratch. To this day, people know me pretty well. You're not going to find quick grab snacks in my house. Typically, it's probably all in the freezer because it needs to be made homemade every single day, all 3 meals. So that's the background of that. So when you look at this picture here, the molding of a child, what do you see? How do you describe the picture? You can put these things in the chat. Tell me what you see in the picture. I'll start. I see fall leaves on the ground. What do you see? And we can look at this picture for days in, and we could pull all kinds of things out of it. What would a child tell us they see in this picture? What's that little 2-year-old who just learned their colors going to describe for us? Maybe a red ball. Maybe they'll catch on it's a football. Maybe they'll catch on the leaves are red, or they might see them as brown. They might have also just learned that at one point those leaves were green. Maybe they see the dog's eyes as gray. Maybe they see them as blue. Maybe they've only learned to say doggy or puppy if this is not a full-grown dog. Maybe it's an itty bitty baby puppy. What do you see? This picture represents just innocence, not just this little puppy here, but of the children and people who would see it. Even as an adult, I can describe every piece. The dog has yellowish tan fur. The dog has a reddish brown nose. There's some green grass in the back. This is outside on a fall day. I can use all those pieces I learned even as an adult, and this picture still represents the innocence. And sometimes that innocence can be tainted with no consciousness regarding it, no ill will or intent, but just by simple messages. This picture simply represents colors and animals. Look at this picture. What do you see? I'll pause for you all to type some descriptors in the chat. What do you see in this photo?
The chat is disabled.
Ah, there we go. So can folks unmute?
So we're typing in the conference chat bar.
Gotcha.
Yep,
So
the conference chat bar will follow the recording. So the recording of this will be available later. So we're having everybody use that chat instead of in the Zoom so that it doesn't get lost.
okay. So can I have two people unmute and tell me one thing that you see in this image?
A halo.
Okay, someone else.
Double ears.
Okay, more people.
A bride and groom.
A bride and groom. I heard someone in the background that didn't get to get their voice in.
Angel wing.
Okay, angel wings. So someone said toys.
An angel and a devil.
Okay, an angel and a devil.
Sun rays.
Sun rays.
Eggs.
Okay, someone said eggs. And so as you think about the descriptors coming forward, if I take away my vision, how much more detail can your description give? If I cannot physically see the picture and it is up to you to describe it to me, what could you add on to halo, eggs, angel and devil, bride and groom? How do you make this the most vivid picture possible for me? First, you're going to need to add some colors. I see white angel wings. I see a brown circle with devil horns and a black cloak holding whatever that thing's called, a spear. I see a yellow halo glistening in yellowish sun rays. I see some confetti pieces hanging from the top of the picture. They're a blackish silver color. So we think about how innocent it is to just describe a photo. And as some folks begin discussing what this image might be. So this is the fun part of the keynote. So I heard someone say eggs. Someone said a bride and groom. This is actually an ad. It's actually selling a product to us. Eggs is typically the common guess that I get, followed closely by ping pong balls. But the one that typically never comes up is this. This is a Dunkin' Donuts ad. These are donut holes, chocolate and white powder. Now, with just this imagery alone, we think about what messages in general get connected to color. When we talk about intersectional racial equity, across every form of identity, there is still going to be a racial intersection with that. Race defined as melanin content. 3 simple groups: white, brown, black, with black being defined socially and historically as the darkest skin tone. This picture all by itself, with no context, no words, show this to a preschool child. Show them this image 7 times, or images similar that pick colors of lightness and darkness that do not depict people. And by the 7th time, that same young learner will have connected some meanings in terms of what color means, and maybe even added some values in as they get a little bit older. Images like this that pit dark and light shades that represent what could be people, by the 14th exposure, become a bias for that same child with no description or no discussion that helps them learn and see it at any different rate. So how do these young minds develop? Well, this is something you might be familiar with. There are many different forms of development scales for kids. So by the age of 2, children begin absorbing those stereotypes that they hear and see. They're creating their own biases, not just about others, but about themselves. They even begin to exhibit fear or dislike towards people with different skin tones, language, physical abilities as well. Let's drop into the nursery. Age 2, Rose. Miss Danica, when I grow up, I want to be your color brown. Why, Rose? You have a beautiful shade of brown. No, the other kid said this brown is ugly. I want your brown. By age 4, children seek labels to be able to identify themselves. And then they begin to have their own causes and theories for what makes someone have that difference. Again, with limited discussion, think about how problematic these theories that they form will create. And think about that embarrassing moment with a child in the grocery store, in the public bathroom, where they highlight someone's difference in a very negative connotation, but it's voiced with innocence. They can begin to understand name calling and teasing and things that are unfair, but they might miss some other small pieces. So let's drop into my kindergarten classroom and see what happened that day that day when getting to school after the bus incident. Hey, Danica, my dad has a huge bottle of Elmer's glue in the garage. If you ever get tired of being Black, you can come over and we'll pour it on you and you won't be Black anymore. Larry, my kindergarten best friend, a young white boy. On this particular day, I'd never known that being Black was an issue for anyone. I thought it was something to be highlighted and celebrated. What I learned that day at the bus stop on the corner of Plum Street was that my color, not only did it have negative connotations to people, but there were also connected meanings to it. And it was something that needed to be changed on my part. And on this given day, if Larry had not been my best friend before, on this day, he became my best friend because the solution Larry posed was ingenious. Larry gave me a way to not have to live the rest of my life past age 5 being a color that was considered dumb and ugly. And how did that begin to impact me when it was said to my sister? Well, my young 5-year-old mind, if we're dressed as twins, we must be twins, because that's how easy it is to mold the mind of a child. This is why when you have spirit days and kids are asked to find a twin, it is very typical that in my duty day, I receive a phone call from a parent who's upset about the twin day because their brown child was probably told by a white child, you can't be my twin, you have brown skin. So fast forward, how do these young minds keep developing? Between the ages of 6 and 8, so now we're 1st through 3rd grade, they continue to gain correct and incorrect information. They develop their own feelings and differences. They acknowledge different ways about their own identity across other categories. And they're capable of making these judgments in spaces about equity, unfairness, and privilege. And they will begin to voice those truths and biases more loud than they have voiced in the past before. So again, go back to Dunkin' Donuts. That same image over and over with no context. Children are shaping the world in their own mind, sometimes with no adult guidance. And sometimes we end up here in the space where what they've developed now, they have the vocab to go with it, the words to describe it, and they can now assign it to people. So let's drop into a 3rd grade classroom. What do you mean he won the spelling bee contest? Brown kids like him aren't smart. This is the elementary school I dropped in. Because now they're capable of making their own judgments on people by their own beliefs, incorrect or correct, that they've been allowed to suck in, that started with just blank imagery with no text. So what beliefs can be held about different races and groups of people, specifically because of the tone of their skin? I asked educators this, and here's some things they told me. For American Indian, Native American people, some simple beliefs. They all have to wear feathers. There's no value for education. They live in teepees. And these are just some. Again, these are adults giving these responses. What do we believe about Latinx folks? They all speak Spanish. They're all undocumented. They're all from Mexico. They love tacos and they're Catholic. What do we believe about white folks? They're financially stable, good credit. They can swim. They're assumed innocent. They're the beauty standard. They're highly educated. What about our Asian colleagues? They're good at math. Poor drivers, how to understand, high educational expectations, they're business minded. What about Black people? High in poverty, absent fathers, can't swim, often guilty, great athletes, their entertainers is their aspiration, crime, gang, violence, lacking in education. If these are the same adults molding the young minds sitting in classrooms today, it doesn't sit too far away from how we end up with imagery like this. What do you see? Well, this is a typical representation of Halloween, where cultures get mocked and mimicked and made to be cultures that are just for wear. So we have a little Black boy who identifies, and in this picture is supposed to be Abu, the monkey. Let me fast forward to when one of those children, the picture I showed you closest to me, we were walking into the public library and a young woman and her daughter out loud exclaimed, "Look, sweetie, look at the two monkeys coming by." My precious nephew, "A monkey? Where?" All we wanted to do was go in the library and get books. But on that specific day, at the age of 3, we had to pause and discuss why we were referenced as monkeys and the historical context that a 3-year-old can't really process because monkeys are so cool. But now today, he understands that message, and he also understands how kids can be conditioned to think that that is a natural piece, but it's not. So we keep looking at this world around us, and here we go again. At a kid brand, t-shirts. Monkey message reaffirmed for another young mind. What's more impressive about this brand, or lack of impressiveness, I should say, is that this company managed to produce hangers with racial diversity across all skin tones, assigning all of the people, such as princesses, military, firefighters, to children that present with white skin, and all the animals, including tigers and monkeys, to children with brown skin. These same images then shape beliefs in mind. So if a child at the age of 5 wearing an Add a Kid t-shirt didn't understand, because the catch for these shirts is not the shirt per se, you're really paying for the hanger is what they say. Then we look at how we perceive Native American people because of how historically we talk about them and teach them, what we don't break down involving Thanksgiving, what we do. And so all of this goes into molding that same young mind. So now let's fast forward to college. These same young minds have been molded over an entire career now. They're now leading productions, they're in marketing and management. And then we go to ask athletes about their aspirations. Look who has future aspirations for careers, and look who's limited to just their race, their ethnicity, and who's at home. This is why the capacity of an adult is so critical. The work that you all do shaping those minds, those young minds, if it's eluding discussing color, as simple as it is to say a football is red, it can be that simple to identify different skin tones of people across all shades of white, brown, tan, black, peach. It's that simple. Because if we don't, we can't teach a child to honor what they don't see. So all the while, language of colorblindness is prevalent for many, as the appropriate thing to do? And is it possible that that became a coping mechanism because we had limited information around just simple things such as standard of beauty for brown skin to be valued as beautiful just as well as lighter skin and peach colored skin and white colored skin? What does all that mean for a child? So pause and think, what's resonating with you most? And what does this mean for you as an educator, as an early childhood home visitor? What does it mean for your personal journey, your professional journey? Because there's a lot here. The innocence of children can be as loving as we want it to be, or is biased. And sometimes we'll never know what it is until they form the language for it, until they have more exposure. But all the while, what we have to remember is Dunkin' Donuts, pictures that pit images of good versus bad, dark colors and light colors. That picture of those donut holes, to remind you, a preschool age child between the ages of 2 and 4, 7 times with an image like that, with no context and no discussion, they're already shaping their own meanings. And by the 14th exposure, they can now connect those images to people with no guidance, because something as simple as learning colors can have that big of an impact with no guidance. So what do we do in early childhood spaces, in home visits? How do we educate parents to educate on this? What does it look like? What could it look like? So the biggest piece about this is, one, always starting with self. Most kids across all layers of identity, school does not typically build in space for them to educate and learn about themselves first. We're constantly teaching about others. That method of education has harm from the youngest learners of mind all the way to the working class adults down to the retired senior citizen. Lack of self-reflection on self allows one to believe that they are dismissed from this conversation about identity outside of gender, agender, language, maybe religion, maybe their ability sometimes. But within all those intersects, we have beautiful people showing up in all different capacities, in white skin, black skin, and brown skin. And it all comes down to how intentional can we be in the language that we provide these same young minds to educate. So if I go back to kindergarten, Larry's solution about the glue, I was amazed, only because in 5 short years of my life, I had been affirmed, I had been loved, I never had an incident that told me I was any different. 5 years compared to 1 minute at a bus stop took all of this away from me at the age of 5, all of it. To where Elmer's glue, never mind that it dried clear, was the only way for me to have a happy life now at the age of 5. It was the only way for me to walk around the world and just want to blend in and not be seen. Because what I learned later down the road, again, because I never unpacked with my mother, with my father, with any of us, what that conversation was. And I would go all the way up until age 26 and actually sit with that. And what did that mean for me? What connections did I take with those words that were said that day? But what I discovered was they happen everywhere. Every day, some kids are learning that they have more power and privilege over others just simply by the tone of their skin. And others are learning that they're less valued than, not as intelligent, not as beautiful. For me as an adult, outside of graduate school, what I thought about for myself was, what message did that day solidify for me at the age of 5 that I never told anyone else, but the same feeling comes over me, many different spaces, many different settings. And it was this. That day, when this second grader, whose name I do not know, told my sister to shut up because whatever she said was not right and she was dumb, black, and ugly, not only were those words synonymous for me, and I carried that for years, but I discovered that over time, as a young mind transitions, you begin to elevate how you define the detriment. For me, ugly wasn't just about physical appearance. Ugly meant that to advocate for myself when harm was being done was ugly. If people did not like how my voice sounded, having a deeper voice for a woman, that made me ugly too. Ugly meant that if someone thought differently of me because of false information they had, then I was going to be stuck in this ugly persona of that person for the rest of my life. And so we don't think too much about the harm of the misperception that young minds carry. But to know that every single day, there are people sitting in therapy rooms processing and trying to figure out where they first solidified these messages. And many of them, with the help of therapy and counseling, are tracking them all the way back to an event that happened somewhere between their preschool years and first and second grade that they might not have had the language for. And where did that start for whoever caused that harm? Something as simple as imagery with no conversation, no ability to reflect on color. How simple is it to go back and look at a picture with a child? If we can name the color of the puppy, is there harm in naming the different shades of skin? And how can we get to that level without feeling offensive? How do we get to that level without feeling like we just don't need to do this? To get different results, we have to do something different. The typical phrase says, when people know better, they do better. My colleague offered to me, it's actually twofold. When adults know better, they do better. When the child sees better from the adult, the child does better. So now when I read my picture book, we're not just going to pause and talk about what's happening in the plot. We're going to talk about what we see with the people. What color their hair, their eyes, their skin tone. What are they doing? Could this be anybody's family on the page? Do all families look like this? How else might a family look? Those small conversations have the capacity to change a child and transform their thoughts and beliefs before they even form and miseducate themselves. And it just takes a couple seconds to add onto the dialogue. We have great foundational work already in place, but to build on that. So now it comes down to, what is the adult prepared to do? So how do you challenge some of these spaces in your own space? Is it about artwork? How does the artwork represent race? And again, race defined here as just melanin content. I'm not going to ethnic groups per se. Do books have hidden messages? For the longest time, many counselors, therapeutic programs would share with kids about different emotions using that old school set of books with themes such as tattling, teasing, bullying. You might remember those books, but you might remember also those books also utilize specific characters and rate and skin tones by the theme of the book. So very easy to get a message when I'm using that book with my 3-year-old in a preschool nursery classroom space, that if we're talking about whining, the book always used a young white girl with yellow blonde hair and blue eyes and blue ribbons in her hair. When the book was about bullying, the book shifted to using kids with brown skin. What hidden messages exist in the book? What racial stereotypes exist or negative connotations in pictures? So many to choose from. Black people having bigger lips, our brown Asian people, how are their eyes drawn? And then what happens when kids begin to draw those images? Let me take you to 2013, City Hall competition for homelessness. One child, a 6th grader, entered in the competition and was slated to win. However, the picture represented anyone intended to have brown skin or an ethnicity that was outside of American culture, with every stereotypical image you can imagine. But that image was going to be displayed in the public library for weeks on end. How do you tell a child at the age of 6th grade, well, they wanted you to win. However, this image cannot be on display? What would it look like to mold that child's mind a little bit earlier before stripping this child of his win? And can you strip the win without educating? And can you educate without stripping the win? I don't know. When you think about books, are the authors the same race as the people in the book that they're representing? Do they have the authority to write those stories? Oftentimes, many of the books that we pick for kids' picture books, whether they are fun picture books or they're taking different American stories and turning them into stories that have Black and brown characters in them, sometimes those stories would say that they're from a traditional African tribe or they're from a native tribe, but sometimes those authors don't even have the permission to be sharing that story. Therefore, the story is already null and void, which means there's probably some hidden things in there that we don't even know that we just read to the kid out loud. And now again, we've added to that palette of here's all the things I got. And now when I have the language, I turn it into this over here. Thinking about stereotypes. I showed you a list of all the ones that existed across ethnic groups. They were presented to me by teachers from early childhood all the way to 6th grade. If that's what exists in the teaching space, then what gets taught to kids? In education, we teach not the world as we know it is or how it should be perceived. We teach the world as we perceive it, which means whatever I hold on to in my own bias and unconsciousness, I'm going to pass it on to the youngest learner and the oldest learner. The oldest learner has the benefit because they have tools and critical thinking skills, so we hope, to be able to shift through that and distinguish knowledge from foolishness. When we think about books and characters, how are different melanin contents given positive values and aspirations, despite current situation, setting, location? How do we aspire with our children? This not only has meaning for kids with brown skin, but it has a ton of meaning for kids with white skin as well. How is that possible? The United States prides themselves on graduating high school candidates with high abilities for academic performance. The common data point no one typically talks about is this. The United States falls far behind in graduating kids with cultural and racial competency, to the point that a company formed in Chicago, Illinois, that went into colleges to look at the student candidates coming out of programs such as engineering, architecture, education, and business. They asked these students to rate themselves on how well they are able to identify across racial differences with their peers, taking guidance and leadership from people who look different than them, being supervised by them, and working in team capacity. Most categories rated students rated themselves is 98% proficient take on that work. Those same students across an entire state and region were followed from their college years into the first years of their career. And the folks who hired them from those recruiting fairs were asked the same questions. The highest rating that the folks who recruited those same students who are 98% confident they have all the tools to be racially aware, racially sensitive, racially appropriate, the highest rate category was 33%. Now, because I was a math specialist, I do know that 98% to 33% is a 65% difference. So somewhere, something shifted. If we took the same study and could find the language for a toddler to share with us their readiness for kindergarten, what would that same study show? Would those same folks bringing them into kindergarten have the same perception as what exhibits on the playground at recess time, in the lunch cafeteria, while working in partner time, while sitting in circle time? Would there be a disparity? How do we mend that by just what we do with children? We used to think this started at a much older age, but research has shown us over and over again, it starts the minute the child is born. What I discovered was if an animal can be conditioned to be racially conscious or respond differently by race, gender of different people, that would be my dog. I'm pretty sure this is happening with children as well. My dog has a very different response when the mailman changes. I think my grandma conditioned him that way, but he does. There's a difference in how he's going to respond if the mailman is a male versus if the person is a woman. So again, if it happens with animals, it definitely happens with children. If we're reading nonfiction picture books to kids, is the information accurate and historically relevant to the story of the message that we're trying to give the child? One of the most important things with that is when even a scene that seems like it might be fictional, asking children, could that happen to anybody? One thing I discovered with picture books is when the story is fictional, a lot of the imagery for kids, they are conditioned and their mind works to just normalize that to whoever was in that picture. Or if the person in the story looks like them and the situation is detrimental, such as overcoming poverty, some sort of hardship, even different abilities, kids are conditioned naturally to say, there must be some extra layer to that child that I don't have that looks like me, toward that happened to them. Those typical messages begin to circulate between that 6 to 8 range category, and so they begin to justify why. So now we're making hierarchies within racial groups. So that means that you could have a group of kids who all have the same race, and they're already making hierarchies on how they're higher above the kid next to them. And they're looking at that by using all the intersections of language, religion, ability, family structure, possessions and items, materialistic things. And so if that's happening at that age, then there's so much more to take from this in terms of how we shape and mold young minds. So Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, also called the godfather of equity, asked this question once to college students sitting in an education class. He asked the students, do you have the will, skill, capacity, and knowledge to transform education? When he asked his college students this, he was talking about transforming education society from a classroom setting in a brick and mortar building. So today, as I wrap up to give you a chance to pose questions, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Do you have the will, skill, capacity, and knowledge to transform how you educate young minds conscious of racial equity and racial consciousness? What Dr. Hilliard offered his students was this. If you ask yourself these questions one at a time, do you have the will? Yes or no? Do you have the skill? Yes or no? Do you have the capacity? Yes or no? Do you have the knowledge? Yes or no? He would tell college students this, whichever ones you answered no on, there is your work. Dr. Hilliard said that will is the easiest to come by. It's literally just a thing of, I know right from wrong, and I believe in that, or I don't believe in that. It's the simple automatic piece of wherever your beliefs land you. So most adult educators can find the will because we know that there are some problems we want to address. Sometimes our will, we have to look at how deeply it's committed though. I have the will, but I'm not willing to use my capacity to go out and transform in other spaces. That becomes a challenge. So we're across the board, because you're here today, I would assume you have that will to learn how to transform education from the young learners standpoint. The skill, developing, and there's always spaces you can push in with how you're going to do that. The capacity, that's where it goes beyond just you and your learning. Can you take it into the spaces you exist in every single day, not just professionally, but also personally? And knowledge, what do you don't know that you don't know? What do you don't know, but you think you do? And what do you know that you know? Distinguishing all three of those categories is how you build as a leader to shape the minds of young folks and also shape the same parents who are molding those young folks. So in closing, the mindful molding of a child requires the critical capacity of us as adults. it also requires us to ask the same question. Do we have the will, skill, capacity, and knowledge to transform education in a way that centers racial consciousness? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Danica. That was amazing. Yes, I already see some claps up there. I love that. Let's go ahead and start some questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself. We will do the best to get as many as we can in the next 13 minutes. Anyone like to start us off with some questions, comments?
I would like to start. Hi, first of all, that was amazing. As a woman of color, I'm here going like, yes, I wanted to interrupt you so many times to share so many stories. It was amazing. Thank you for that. I'm not sure. I have so many questions. Maybe the one from me is on your own experience, because trust me, as a woman of color, I have experienced so many things that you mentioned, both at school and at work, and it's really hard. I have the will, I have the capacity, I have the skill. It's been very hard for me to find a way to communicate with my superiors, ways to try to help understand how to reach the Black, the Latino, I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm a Spanish interpreter, understanding how to help and react. I have heard before, how do we reach those people? For you and your personal, I mean, here's your little girl, and I could tell you a story similar to yours, what you said at 5 o'clock, at 5 years old. I was 6.5 in New York City. And I was yelled, just walking lost back home by a group of Italian boys. What are you doing in this side of town, you dirty Puerto Rican? I was terrified. And there were some Black kids older than me that came to my rescue. That day I was terrified that I was going to be raped, killed, and just left in a corner. So trying to bring knowledge, understanding, and skill when I go to the homes, to the Latino community, to understand how to break that bridge, because I see that many times they don't understand how to connect. And I think that sometimes they feel like they connect more with me because I'm brown, I'm Latina, and the interpreter. Can you give me some advice on how can I help them find the way to communicate better and understand that there's ways to get that bridge to get shorter and connect to that community and their fears?
Thank you for the question. I was trying to see, it's not showing me the little yellow box for who's speaking. What is your name?
My name is Jennifer Mejias, and I'm trying to see if I could, so you could see my face. Let's see.
Oh, it's okay. I would like usually speak around the mainstream. So thank you, Jennifer, for the question. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing your lived experience in this space, that level of vulnerability. If I'm hearing you correctly, your question is around leaders and your colleagues when they come to you and helping them make the connection to connect with communities in Black and brown spaces.
Yes, and in my case will be the Latino community, because I see the frustration, because I think sometimes they feel like there's a barrier between them and their client that they're trying to help, because they seem to connect and confine more with me. And I'm trying to find ways to help them understand that, first of all, that's a natural reaction. They feel like, first of all, they connect better with me. I'm Latina, I speak Spanish, they know me. Just find ways to help them get that bridge to make shorter, and then, because my purpose is to make sure that they connect with the community and learn how to help the families better, because I know they want to. That's what they do and they love it. But I kind of sometimes feel that way, that they just feel like they're connecting more with me than with them.
So that makes me wonder two things. One, what is the individual's comfort in coming to you versus going to those folks that they're serving? That question in itself, again, that level of vulnerability to be able to admit, right? So at the end, I talked about, what do you know that you don't know? What do you think you know, but you don't know? And what do you know that you know? Within those classifications, what I'm wondering for those specific individuals is, what are the pieces that they're afraid to find out that they don't know that they don't know? Because oftentimes there's fear in that. Second, I also reflect on whatever biases are coming up in that space. Because sometimes when we talk about melanin content within ethnicity and language groups, if there are populations within that, so some folks are conditioned to think of race as specific, like this ethnic group is always this color, this one's this one. And so sometimes when I look at that, the continuum of lightest, darkest skin across any ethnic group, looking at how that colorism is showing up, because it's possible that there might be some pieces, if I go over there, I'm going to interact with this melanin content, but they might see a difference in you that is more within their liking, and having to address that conversation flat out by just asking, what about me? Because again, you only speak for what you know, but doesn't mean that you speak for all people who speak the same language, have the same ethnic background. So what is it? And asking that question flat out, like, I'm noticing that you're constantly coming to me. What have you tried to reach out on your own? What was successful? What was challenging about it? What support can I give you to go do that on your? What do you need to make it to the next loop there? So thinking about that question and how you ask that to, again, build their capacity, right?
Thank you. That was great. That helped a lot.
Not a problem.
Dr. Moore.
Hi.
Hi, this is Lindsay Restivo. I don't know if you can see me.
I think
I put a question in the chat. And I feel like it's a pretty good question. In relative terms, my question for you, Dr. Moore, is how do you explain to others that you work with, or in a work capacity as professional peers or families that you're visiting, how do you have a conversation when they tell you, I'm raising my children not to see color?
My go-to response to that is, how do you teach a child to value what you taught them not to see?
Oh, God.
When children begin to play with their peers, they will dismiss that piece of their identity that they carry, which means that children are being parented to invalidate and dismiss a piece of someone's identity, which then down the road, the impact on that child whose identity has been dismissed leads to significant mental and emotional health and trauma, as well as the far extent of self-harm. And then we're looking into those suicide rates for young kids. Early before 2010, suicide rates in the US, the highest numbers were among white youth, typically linked to drug usage and depression. In the last 7 years, we shifted to Asian children, and we were looking before at high school and college age. Not only did the age drop, the racial group changed, the racial ethnic group changed. In the last 5 years, we've now shifted even younger. We're now down to third grade Black kids. And all of that stems from what's happening once you release that child from your home and your parenting into the world. Again, imagery, messages, whatever they get from home, they only need 7 occurrences, and children have grappled onto it, but they don't have the language. By the time you put that preschooler in kindergarten to interact with more kids on the playground, they're just going to regurgitate whatever they heard. And then with that, it's not only to see color, but they're also learning how to treat color because of what you do when you don't see something. You ignore it. We also go back to the Charlie Brown imagery. Remember Charlie Brown, the Thanksgiving photo? Franklin was all by himself on that side of the table. And for years, adults who were raised on Charlie Brown never noticed it because they were conditioned to not see color. So how do you not see this little boy in a photo isolated at Thanksgiving dinner, that's supposed to be a time of family. That's what it looks like. That same mentality is how you got the Charlie Brown picture. It's how you get a lot of the Walt Disney creations. And so again, how do you teach a child to value what you taught them not to see?
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore.
You're welcome.
Hi,
Hi.
this is Regina Engel, and I just wanted to comment on what Mrs. Mejia had to say, how to help the Hispanic community. I have the privilege of working with USD 501 Parents as Teachers, and one of the great things that we do is give resources. So when you're talking to any family, so Hispanic or Latino, anybody, you know, we invite them to activities or anything that's going on in the community. And I think that's the way to make them feel that they're part of the community. So not just whatever you translate, but I think that to have a personal relationship with that family also will be the best thing that you can do. So give them resources of what's going on in the community and tell them, you know, you're invited to go if it's open to the public.
Hi, Regina. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sorry, because showing my face here and talking makes me a little bit nervous. So I'm sorry if I was not clear. That at all, I don't have a problem with that. I do that all the time. I've been a Spanish interpreter for more than 21 years. And I do that every day, actually. You know,
Wonderful.
I do that every day and I help them. And it's wonderful. My situation is that as a trained Spanish interpreter, I'm in the middle of two individuals that speak two different languages and many times two different races. And most of the time, this person or the client knows me, whether it's from the WIC clinic or because they came to the clinics before, they feel comfortable with me. Now I'm with a provider that is trying to make a connection, and my role is to make that connection and that communication with both of them. But I think that because they trust me, I mean, I don't think so. I know they trust me. They see me as being one of them. Sometimes they try to communicate more with me, and it makes a barrier between the provider and the client. And I think that's something, and they could see it. And I think sometimes they feel like it's like they talk more to her, to me. That's not what I want to do. That's not my role. So I'm trying to find ways to help my coworkers to communicate with me and help them make that connection with their client. Because at the end of the day, when I'm interpreting, I want to be a shadow and making sure that they're having that connection and they could be the educators and help them the way that I know they want and are capable to help them.
Okay, so I understand your position. Yes, and I really haven't been a translator or interpreter, so I think what I would suggest is kind of making a rapport with both. I don't know. And I bet you do. And I bet you do.
It takes, when you're doing the kind of work that I do, and I'm sorry that I'm taking so long, is you're in a position when you have to gain the trust of both the professional provider and the client.
Exactly.
And having them trust you is so important so that you could communicate and kind of work together so they could get the best result in educating. We have great providers. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moore. That was excellent. Thank you so much for the reminder of how we have to teach our children. Thank you, and adults.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. It is 1:31. So we are at the end of our session, but lucky for us, Dr. Danica is going to be presenting another session. But yes, thank you so much. It was so excellent, much needed information, and we're so excited to have you back. All please enjoy your 15-minute break, and we will see you at 1:45 for our next session. And thank you again, Dr. Danica.
Thank you.
Thank you.